afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome back to the back half of the day here at Home of Future Thinking. I am, as I hope all of you remember a minute ago when we all introduced ourselves, I'm Casey Steinbacher. I am excited to be part of this next part of the program. We're going to do something a little bit different than what we actually have in the agenda in front of you. One of our panelists today has taken ill and is not able to be with us. So what we're doing is doing a quick audible here. And we're going to move Michael Goodman, who was your moderator. We're going to move him into the panel. And Michael is going to share with you, along with our other panelists, the story of this particular project, Rocky Mount Mills, and a little bit about Durham's American Tobacco Campus. So you're going to get the opportunity in a few minutes to hear 4 incredible stories about how 4 communities across the U.S. Have done incredible and impactful work in place-based economic development. What we mean by that is actually using sense of place, like this authentic, incredible building that you're in right now, to create not only an economic development environment for jobs, but a community development environment and ecosystem for the communities in which they operate. You heard earlier the concept of economic development in and economic development for, and you're going to hear a lot about that in a few minutes. So what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is I'm going to introduce the panelists one at a time. They are going to come up and spend 2, 3, 4 minutes kind of giving you an overview of their project so you understand the specifics of their project. And then as we get all 4 panelists up here, we'll have a conversation amongst us about some of the challenges, some of the obstacles, some of the really insightful things they learned through this process and want to share with you. If we have time, we will certainly do Q&A. I can tell you that I know a lot of these projects, and it would be, I think you will find them not only interesting, you'll want to ask some questions. So I'm going to try really hard to keep us on time so that we have some time for questions and answers. So with that, let's get started and not waste any more time. My first panelist that I'm going to introduce you to and ask to come on stage with me today is Julie Mertz. Julie Metz is with the Goldsboro Downtown Development. She is the Goldsboro Downtown Development Director. You heard her earlier this morning. She's also the Executive Director of the Downtown Goldsboro Development Corporation. In that role, Julie has really has been in charge of transformational changes in downtown Greensboro. And she's done that using the National Main Street model approach to revitalizing downtown. This has included actually the development and implementation of a Goldsboro Historic Neighborhood Revitalization Plan and Downtown Master Plan. This is important insight for a lot of you who are playing in that space to understand revitalization, historic revitalization and master plans. Julie is well known across the state, and she's often asked to come into communities to help with the downtown revitalization, and specifically in the area of North Carolina Main Street activity. She's won numerous awards. She's a great panelist, and I'm really anxious for you to hear the story of downtown Goldsboro. Julie, come on up.
It's a long walk. Thank you, Casey. I am Julie Metz, and I'm the Downtown Director for Goldsboro. I have served in that role for a little over 20 years, and just something to tell you a little bit about where we've come from. When I first started, we had an 80% vacancy rate in our downtown. In fact, when I shared with people when I was thinking about transitioning from urban planning to the downtown role, everybody thought I was crazy. In fact, somebody told me that we should just drop a bomb on downtown and just forget about it. I figured there was very low expectations and there was nowhere else to go but up, so that seemed like a really good place for me to start. But we do practice the National Main Street approach. I think we're one of the more focused organizations across the state in that. And I think one of the big primary generators in what you've been able to see in our downtown is that implementation of that Main Street approach. It's comprehensive, it's focused, it's balanced. And we also did a master plan back in 2006 that really created a venue for people to get involved, to create a vision, to have some buy-in, to get the input and access to being able to create something that they felt would speak to them. And so through that process, we've been able to see some really big changes. I will say, let me see, just to give you some images, this is what our downtown looked like when I started. It was designed for vehicular use only. It had 90% impervious material on our main corridor, which is Center Street. Extremely ugly, not people-friendly. You couldn't see from side to side, 140 feet right away. And so we took that through that visioning process and the planning process and created ways to redelineate the spaces to be more pedestrian-friendly. And then here's some before and after pictures. This is what Center Street looked like before in that same intersection and what it looks like now. Another before picture, this is looking south on Center Street. And this is what it looks like now. These are some of our statistics that we keep track of every year, and you can follow the growth. And I used 2013, 2014 as our baseline year because this is when we were really able to implement the changes that we were recommended as part of our master plan. We got a really large grant, a Taggart grant of $10 million that really moved the needle in making that vision happen. And so our baseline we use is 2013, but we've had 54 net new businesses. We've had over 281 net new full-time positions, nearly 50 net new part-time positions. We've renovated over 150,000 square feet of space that was once vacant and underutilized. And so we've seen a lot of great changes, and it's really due, I think, because of the access that people have been able to have to make the change they wanted to see happen.
Thank you, Julie. Next up, Diana Schwartz. Diana, why don't you start on up since that is a long walk? Diana is the executive director of the Danville River District Association in Danville, Virginia. She served previously as the executive director for the Ocala Main Street organization of Ocala, Florida. Diana, we didn't talk about this. I lived 8 years nearby in Florida there. She relocated to Virginia in 2017 and became the lead executive director for the River District. During a small stint in there as well, she served with the Department of Housing and Community Development for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and then went back to this work. Am I correct? That is correct. And so here to tell you about the Danville River District, Diana Schwartz.
Thank you so much. Does this one work?
No.
This one. All right. I'm going to juggle. I've got papers too. So really quickly, I know that the last 2 years, if I'm not mistaken, of the conference have been held in Danville. So those of you who were able to attend last year or the year before actually have already seen quite a bit of what's going on in the Danville River District. But just to give you a little bit of a background, we also follow the Main Street America 4-point approach. It is an excellent approach. I can't recommend it more. Even when we were not an accredited Main Street, the city absolutely followed that through in their planning and their work. So in 2010, the community underwent master planning and also rebranding, and that's how we became the River District, Danville's River District. And actually, the story goes that it may not have started here, but kind of it did with the real movement downtown, is with the Downtowner Motor Inn. And, you know, part of the Main Street America approach is it's actually community development through historic preservation. And so to talk about the first thing you do to start revitalization is tearing something down is not necessarily always very popular. But in this particular instance, it had to be done. We had a developer, so the story goes, that came into town to look at possibly doing some investment. He and his wife flew into the airport. They drove down the main drag down our main street, and this is what they saw in addition to some other very blighted properties, and they turned around and they left. And so the question was, why did you not make the meeting? What happened? And they said, well, if you're not going to invest in your own downtown, why are we going to invest in your community? So the first thing that they did through a generous grant through the foundation was, first blight elimination was tearing down the Downtowner Motor Inn. So that's the before. This is currently the after, and this is what we're looking at potentially for the future is mixed use with parking on top and commercial on the bottom. I could give you many pictures of eliminating blight, but this is the process that we went through downtown. Number one was begin to eliminate blight. That was also through design work, through streetscaping, lights, trash cans, changing the direction of the roads, all of those things that you take into account with design. The second thing that we decided we had to do is to bring critical mass. And what you see here is the example is increasing the residents in the district. Unfortunately, one of the main thoroughfares through downtown is Craghead Street. Well, to give you an idea of what we were going through, people referred to it in national comedians as Crackhead Street. And no one would go downtown, unfortunately. Literally no one. It was not somewhere you wanted to go. It was considered to be unsafe. And now we went from that to we now have 693 apartments downtown with 93 more to go. And we now have 2,093 residents living downtown. So in addition to this, there's another slide we'll talk about creating more of that critical mass. But the third part of that was adding lifestyle amenities. As we know, it's very, very important when people can choose where to live, work, and play, that we make sure that there's a reason that they want to choose us. Now that we're moving into definitely a more entrepreneurial economy, which is a wonderful thing, people many times will now choose where they want to live, and then they'll decide what business fits there. Not everyone, but you get the idea. And so we've been able to bring in lifestyle amenities such as our Riverwalk Trail. We have Segway tours. We've got a science museum downtown, and many, many more. We also have a wonderful mountain biking trail if you've not had the chance to visit that trail if you're a biker. And so we also have a lot of projects underway. This is the 500 block of Craighead Street. This was a developer, Mr. Rick Barker. Some of you may have had the opportunity to meet before. He actually has been developing this entire block. And so he's got his business Supply Resources on one end with BB&T. We've got Mucho Tacos on the other side. Coming soon, he built 7 luxury apartments on top. We've got a seafood restaurant, Airbnb project, and just recently, he took an old garage, I should have brought you a picture, that by stretch of anyone's imagination should have been normally tore down, and turned it into an artisan smokehouse. So you got to come and try the new brisket. Overall, we've had $35 million in public investment and $151 million in private investment. It's really, really hard in the River District to talk about what your vacancy rate is because a lot of it is warehouse space. So we don't talk in spaces in the River District. We talk in square feet. So as of, we have 497 million square feet available in the River District, and we are anticipated, 2018, we anticipated 3.18 of that being occupied. So you can see we've definitely had some great success. When you talk about building capacity and infill, we've had a number of eating establishments come into play. Since 2010, this is a list of the businesses that have moved downtown since 2010, and we actually just had 2 more open up this week. So that's part of also creating that critical mass. As far as how we did it, I think that's what we'll be talking about here shortly. Thank you.
So the first 2 projects you heard about were there were districts, right? They were about a downtown, they were about a river district, they were blocks of projects that were designated around or developed around a master plan for an overall area development. The next project I think you're going to hear about from Dave Weaver started off as an individual project and then blossomed into a district project. It's a really fascinating project I had the pleasure of actually getting an opportunity to see. But our next speaker is Dave Weaver. Dave is owner of We Impact Group. He's one of those guys, as we talked about, that we all grew up in small communities. He grew up in Elkhart, Indiana, and still is doing project work now there in Elkhart, Indiana. He was part of a team of private individuals responsible for bringing the 5th largest natatorium and community center in the United States to Elkhart, Indiana. This $70 million project was really unprecedented both in its size and scope and in its collaboration with the community. Dave eventually also joined forces with the Community Foundation of Elkhart County, the city of Elkhart, and private members of the community to then establish a river district around the natatorium, and he's actively engaged in the full build out of that district. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Dave Weaver.
Thank you so much, Casey. Really appreciate that. My name is Dave Weaver, Elkhart, Indiana. As Casey said, this really started off in 2012. We had a YMCA that had been around for 130 years. I actually had been a member of that Y since 1982, learned how to swim there, and it was a staple in our community. Like many small town Americas in America and many YMCAs, the world of fitness changed. The world of our family units had changed, and all of a sudden it was about transactional fitness. Planet Fitness, $10 a month. It's no longer the family unit is going to the YMCA to do something. And so, unfortunately, after 130 years, we decided to close that YMCA, and that created a community conversation as to what's next. Where are kids going to learn how to swim? The high school's pools are over 40 years old with deferred maintenance. Local health care providers needed a pool for therapy, and the pool became the conversation that the part of the conversation that united everybody. We put a team around it and started to envision, okay, a new $30 million natatorium will be a Me Too natatorium that is just not that exciting. And we were challenged by the community to say, you know what, we want something special. If we are going to do this, we got one shot to get this right. Today we have, as Casey said, the 5th largest natatorium in the United States. It opened up 4 months ago. We have 40 meets planned so far. We can house 900 athletes on the deck, along with 1,250 spectators in the arena around it. That created a conversation about, again, what's next for our community. Elkhart is unique in that more than 50% of the GDP is manufacturing. More than 80% of RVs in America are made in Elkhart, Indiana. We go from, in 2008 to 2009, 4% to 20% unemployment. We were kind of known as the ground zero of the economy. How do we become relevant as a community outside the peak and trough of economic cycles? And that created, again, a conversation around the River District. Today, the city of Elkhart has deployed $30 million in public infrastructure spending around a 105-acre in a near downtown neighborhood. This is for everything from land assemblage to, we have 2 rivers downtown, zero access to those waterways, creating access. In establishing a plan, utility mitigation, there are a whole series of things I'm sure we'll talk about. But that has established the River District. And today we have about $180 million of development coming out of the ground, with about another $150 million in the next 36 months we anticipate. So thanks a lot for having me. Look forward to talking to you more about the River District.
Thank you, David. And our final panelist today, Michael Goodman. Michael is Senior Vice President for Capital Broadcasting Company. I think most of you, a lot of you in the room, are familiar with Capital Broadcasting Company. It's a diversified media company based in the Research Triangle out of Raleigh in the Durham area. Michael and his brother, Jimmy, who now run the organization. I think they're finally giving Dad a little bit of a break. In the daily operations, are the 4th generation Goodmans to play in the space, Capital Broadcasting space, and in this company. And as part of that, they've inherited an incredible culture of community development that is second to none. Michael is specifically responsible for all of their real estate operations and all of their baseball operations. And I can tell you, living in Durham and at the time being the president of the Durham Chamber of Commerce, Michael was 100% the architect for the American Tobacco campus. And here to talk to us about that campus and the campus you're in right now, Michael Goodman.
Well, thank you. That was I'm impressed you didn't have to read that, actually. I'm impressed you didn't have to read that. So, welcome to Rocky Mount Mills. We're really happy to have you. I remember last year when we were in Danville, I was already in Ted's ear about this needs to come to Rocky Mount because we're kind of ready to show off one of our new babies here. And so I'm glad y'all are getting to see it. Like Casey said, I'm one half of the 4th generation of Capital Broadcasting. We are community developers at heart. I was raised, my brother was raised, not only within the company, but within our family, that, you know, the success of the community is paramount to the success of the company. I always like to illustrate that by saying that when my father took over the company in 1979, we were about the 68th ranked television market in America, and now our television market's about the 25th ranked television market in America. And all that growth in the triangle has been on the backs of great public-private partnerships and great corporate citizenship, you know, and some of the dying breed, if you will, that has made the triangle so great. And we got really lucky in Durham. We didn't know what we were doing. It was a real estate project, and we said, what the heck? Let's just get some buddies and see if they'll lease space. And all of a sudden, Duke University comes out of nowhere, and Glaxo, and, you know, some amazing partners. And what started as kind of a dirty hobby, I guess, turned into about a 1.2 million square foot downtown development that's about to double in size as we look at University Ford. But we kind of cut our teeth on that project. Now, we had a lot of stuff going for us in Durham, North Carolina, right? You're in the triangle. Duke University's right there. You have a huge list of things that are highly, highly indicative of a great upside in a community. Now, we can all look back and say, oh yeah, that's absolutely true. And Ted would probably tell you along with me that if you go back 20 years, people said, do not touch. Do not touch. So we finish American Tobacco and we're coming off this high of historic rehabilitation, and we run into this mill in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And mostly we are already fire aim group, so we bought it. And this was in 2007. We really didn't have an idea what we wanted to do. The economic indicators and population indicators around the region were admittedly bad. This was about, at the end of the day, what I call my father's senior thesis around what economic development is, which is we believe economic development is community development. And while that seemingly is the way we look at urban economic development these days, we don't really focus on it from a more rural perspective. It seems to always be in rural communities, it's a race to the bottom to what low-wage employer we can recruit to our area, and less about why are we actually creating a place people want to live. And so that's what we're working on. We wanted to do a place where people were proud to come and proud to bring their friends. You know, community, I'll talk more about this in a minute, but communities like Rocky Mount, communities like Durham. I thought you were cutting me off there. I don't know. Yes, she would. She would definitely cut me off. Let me know if she's doing it. She'll be doing something like that. But communities like Durham and Rocky Mount had years where there was a downswing, right? And that's an emotional effect that affects your story of what your community is. And changing that story is really the most powerful thing we get to do every day, whether we're working in Durham or whether we're working in Rocky Mount. So I look forward to telling you more about it. That's the generalities of it. I hope you get a tour. If you haven't gotten a tour, Evan Covington is sitting right there. Hey, Evan. She's our #1 tour guide. She also runs the project, but she's a tour guide too. So she can show you around. You got to see it. It's great. We're really proud of it. But I'll tell you more as we start gossiping a bit here.
All right. Thank you, Michael. I'm very proud of you, how quick that was. Very proud of you. So, guys, one of the commonalities I think that all of your projects have, even though they you go about it somewhat differently, is that you're all trying to recreate, or not recreate, re-energize the community. And as Michael just said, use it as a community development tool. That sounds easy, not so much. So let's each of you just spend a minute talking to me about, not the barriers of the projects per se, not the physical aspects yet, but the barriers of the community, understanding the importance of this economic development project as a community development project. Who wants to start? David will. Go ahead. Oh, Julie, Diane, who wants to go?
Thank you.
Diana, go.
What I've seen, and I was not born and raised in Danville. I had the great fortune to go there and be able to do this work about 3 years ago. And it's what I refer to as a self-esteem problem. You know, sometimes we look at people that have self-esteem problems, but our community seems to have a bit of a self-esteem problem. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's almost as if people can't even believe the good things that are happening. We also have people I mentioned earlier about, there was this idea 8-10 years ago that you don't go into downtown Danville. And unfortunately, believe it or not, we still have people in our community that still haven't been back in downtown Danville ever since all of this happened. So overcoming that perception of maybe not being safe, and that we are a good enough community. We do deserve this, and it can happen to us.
Dave, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd say that's very interesting. I always say in the Midwest, we have a self-deprecating mentality that we don't deserve nice things. And, you know, there are different strategies. Greenville, South Carolina, it's been very incremental change over the last 40 years. In Elkhart, Indiana, we haven't focused on economic development for so many decades that we had to do something transformational. If we started doing something incremental, we just couldn't get there fast enough. I always say that the River District is the ante into being relevant. As someone said earlier, really Gen Z, they're choosing they're choosing place and purpose over paycheck almost 100% of the time. It's interesting, in Elkhart, Indiana, we're actually known for two things outside of RVs, and that's philanthropy and entrepreneurship. But we haven't figured out how to bring those together. And so this was our way to see what happens at the crossroads of philanthropy and entrepreneurship. How do we create massive, transformational, generational change in our community using public-private partnerships? And it's very difficult. I mean, it's a paradigm shift. To get back to your original question, it is a paradigm shift for the community to, one, think this belongs in our community, and two, that we can actually pull it off.
Jill?
I would say for us, I think one of the challenges was just accepting change. You know, change is hard. You know, when we talked about the master plan and had everybody come out to talk about what they wanted to see happen in their downtown, they were very engaged and they were very optimistic. But then when it came time to actually do it, when the money actually was available to make it start to happen, then they started to get nervous. And it wasn't until then, you know, the reality hit them. And so I think change is really hard, and accepting that, and from a governmental perspective, I think loosening up kind of the controls was a bit of a challenge for us. You know, letting it be a little bit more grassroots, allowing different ideas to be part of the conversation. So for us, that was a big part of overcoming that to get where we are.
Michael, I'm really interested in yours. Did you see any difference between Rocky Mount and Durham in that area?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, okay, so you're saying the same thing, which is this notion of nothing ever good happens in blah, blah town, right? Nothing ever good to happen here. And that, you know, starts and just is a virus in the community for positive outlook. It's actually one reason I love historic renovations on factories like this. And it played out in Durham, and my hope is it'll play out here, but there's a notion of American Tobacco in downtown Durham was one of the most significant corporate existence, you know, groups in existence in downtown Durham. And when they closed in August of 1987, that was a shockwave, right? That was a shockwave for many reasons. One reason is because, you know, what most people miss is these institutions, they weren't your job, they were your life. Your housing was here, your doctor was here, your pharmacy was here. American Tobacco gave you a carton of cigarettes every week. It's nice of them. But my point is that, you know, you have the immediate shock of people's loss of prosperity, but then you have the ongoing shock of a boarded up facility that sits there every single day. And in downtown Durham, that's 70,000 people a day driving down a freeway, seeing a boarded up facility that says to them, Durham has failed, right? We have failed. And that story doesn't change. And that's how the virus starts to leak in. And, you know, we didn't know that when we launched into Durham because we'd never done this before. We knew in Rocky Mount that that'd be a serious thing to contend with. And a lot of this is about, you know, show and tell. You show me, right? We want to show people. And secondly, I want people to understand how positive I am about Rocky Mount. I'm not from Rocky Mount, right? We're coming here because we perceive some level of economic interest in investing in this community. And that's...
I promise I'm not telling.
Is this me? Where's God?
God, where are you?
Right, we see an economic interest in investing in this community, right? And the other advantage we have, right or wrong, is we're a private for-profit company. And so we want consensus, but we don't have to have it, right? We can get to work and get it done and do it in a way, you know, that we involve the community. This event space is here to involve community. That's what we're trying to do. So, yeah, that's the toughest thing to contend with. But I feel the story changing, and the story in Durham is absurdly changed. It's like gone the wrong way too far. It's way this way, right?
We're incredibly self-obsessed with our success right now.
Yes. We love talking about our success in Durham. And I promise you one day Rocky Mount will too.
There you go. So let's talk about that a little bit, and not just not just this problem of self-image, But the whole concept of convincing a community that change is good, the whole concept of getting them excited about where it is you go. How have talk to you a little bit, how have each of you overcome those challenges inside the community? And aside from just do it, we know that just do it. What are the kind of community engagement things that you do, or community involvement things that you've done, or lack of that you learned from that you should have done in your projects? Dave, let's start with you this time.
I don't think you can discount the just do it. And having public-private partnerships where the private side is taking the lead and saying, we're going to figure this out no matter what, is a game changer. At least it has been in our community. We decided if we were going to do this, we were going to do it right. We were going to hire the best in the United States in our mind. And so we hired some well-known national planners to come in and take us through a very painstaking process. Communication was everything from 15 to 70 stakeholders in very intimate settings with those subject matter experts, with those planners for input. And those would be followed up with very public sessions over an 8-month process to kind of get everybody comfortable with the idea of where we were taking it. There's a main thoroughfare through town, Jackson Boulevard, that is the main streetscape today, in which people would go 50 miles an hour, and that was a thoroughfare through town. Now, how do you take that down to 25 miles an hour and get people comfortable with the fact that if someone gets hit at 40 miles an hour, they have a 90% chance of dying? If it's at 25 miles an hour, they have a 90% chance of living. Getting people to understand that paradigm was very interesting, but it was very methodical. And the other thing you have to accept is you'll never get everybody there. At some point, you just have to go forward.
Julie?
Yeah, I would say that, for me, I started out small. I concentrated on one person. For those of you that are familiar with Goldsboro, we had a mayor, Mayor Al King, who was a big supporter of downtown and downtown development across the state. And so I met with him every Friday over coffee. I just happened to stop by his favorite coffee spot and just share with him, the language to be able to communicate the need and the purpose to have change happen and what that could mean to our community. And so over time, it was just like it was his own words. He would share it, and he would share it with great passion. And so starting out with him, and then just community organizational presentations, and I was able to identify about 6 communities across the United States that had done similar projects, streetscape projects that had economic impact. It took me a while to find those numbers that I could share as examples, but using that in any type of engagement process that I could to share, the economic impacts that we could potentially experience if we were so daring and bold to do something different.
Diana, Michael, anything you want to add?
Sure. For us, there's definitely things that we could do a better job, but we get a lot of criticism in the River District when the government puts money, when the local municipality puts a lot of money into the River District. We hear from lots of folks in the community, well, why is it always about the River District? Why does all this money go into the River District? There's other parts of Danville, there's other parts that need to be addressed as well. And all of that is true. So part of it has been educating people that the money gets invested in the River District that generates tax income, and that income does not stop at the line of the district. That goes throughout the entire community. That's your fire, that's your roads, that's your public service, it's your education. And so we all need to be invested in people investing in the River District, because it is very much, it has to start somewhere. That's the Main Street model, is it's incremental. If you scatter it too far and wide, it doesn't have the same impacts as slowly and systematically building that case. One thing that we've struggled with that we could probably do better, we've got organizations that we partner with that do a great job. Middle Border Forward here is a great example, but we could probably do a better job even engaging our partners than we already do. One of the challenges that we see as we move forward is we have a very socioeconomically diverse community, and we do hear feedback that there's many segments of our population that no longer feel like we are developing a downtown that they feel like they're part of, that it's not a reflection of them, they don't necessarily feel agency with. And so that's something that we're very mindful of. We're trying to make sure that we celebrate culture a lot more downtown in many, many ways, not only the culture of textiles, but the historic Black Business District and other places throughout the downtown, and make sure that not everything that comes into the downtown is a high-end boutique. It's a balance. You have to make sure that you're addressing the entire population. So that's something that we have to really make sure that we're paying attention to.
Yeah, it takes some convincing for people to realize that this is not a zero-sum game, right? That a rising tide does in fact float a lot of boats, and at the end of the day, investing in Rocky Mount is investing in Rocky Mount, or investing in Durham is investing in Durham. Buy-in for us was actually a little different, because the interesting thing about a facility like this or a facility like American Tobacco is a lot of families have very deep ties to that group. They either work there, or they used to steal cigarettes there, or they snuck in for their senior prank and burn it down, or whatever they did, right? But they had a connection. That was part of their story growing up. So, people already really care. That's one thing I love about Durham, one thing I love about Rocky Mount is people really do care a lot. And then it's really about creating reasons for people to be there. Because one thing we think about ourselves as is we're kind of community center 2.0, right? Back in the day, ask Dan Gerlach back there about how many golden leaf requests he got for people who want to build a community center in their town, because that's really what's going to change the path forward. And the fact of the matter is that's kind of the old model. The new model is you can do this in a place people want to be. And so we look at doing the beer that we do and the restaurants and just the congregation area as a place people can be together. And that really is a really big change agent in a community like this. We already have a lot of stories about people who just met or just realized they were in this community working together on something similar, and now they're working together. And a lot of the things that I take for granted living in Durham and having that density has to be a little more curated here. So we focus a lot on our events and a lot on our programming, make sure it's diverse and make sure we're bringing out new and different people to be a part of what's happening here at the mill. And in doing so, you're kind of passively getting that buy-in.
So stay with you a minute. I'm going to jump on that. One of the comments that we heard earlier explaining to the audience was this whole concept of creating collisions. In Durham, I think Durham has learned and is really, really good about being what we say is we create intentional collisions. So we create a space and that allows the collision to happen organically on its own, but we're very intentional about it. So give me a couple examples of what that means, Michael, of how that works, of why there's a fire pit and hammocks outside my apartment, not green space.
Because I wanted to do hammocks out there. Yeah, I think the key to everyone in here's job is I hate this phrase, but we got to be way outside the box, guys. The problem is there's not a lot new under the sun. I hate to tell you that, right? It's probably been tried somewhere. And the question is, can we be bolder? Can we be bigger? Can we be different? So no, I don't want a hammock. I want a damn hammock farm. No, I don't want a brewery. I want 6 breweries in the world's first brewery incubator. No, I don't want to foster startups. I want to create the American Underground and have 300 startups in it, right? That's probably a big fault of mine. That's how I think. But at the end of the day, I think big, grand thinking is what we need as more rural communities, right? Guys, I was reading a City Lab article this morning. I'm telling you, it's gonna switch course, and we're gonna start having inbound opportunities like you've never seen. And the battle between all of us is going to be about who has the quality of life attributes that are going to make people want to live in my community. That's the fight of the future. It's not about who's getting the best tax incentives. It's not about any of that crap. It is about who has the best place to live, because that's what people care about and the job will follow. So if you're going to work on something, I urge you to work on that.
To that end, Diana, let me start with you. To that end, if quality of place really matters, and we know it does, how do you build in quality of place to the projects that it is that you're doing? How do you think, well, how do we create this, how do we not only create but brand our authentic community in a way that people want to be here? How do you build that into your plan?
Well, intentionality, for one thing. You have to think about it right from the very beginning. I'll give you an example where they took down the downtowner that you saw the picture of earlier today. The Dan River Mills, we want to talk about buildings that people pass every day and remind them of things that have failed and deeply, not just their jobs, but they feel like a failure in their community. One of there used to be a sign on the very top that said home of Dan River Mills. It was giant, this giant sign, neon sign lit up. And I can't tell you, when I would talk to people, they would always say, whenever I would go travel somewhere and I would come back, I would see home, and I knew I was there. So when they took that sign down, they kept those letters. And when they tore down the downtowner, they turned that home into public art, because they wanted people to know, even though the mill wasn't there, even though the downtowner was gone, this is still home. And so it's being very intentional about things like that in big ways and in small ways, in every way that you can thread it through. As we see some of the redevelopment, and I know this happens in a lot of places. For instance, we developed a restaurant. There was a restaurant developed called Cotton, and it was in one of the old textile parts of the textile part of Dan River, actually. And they made sure and thread through that pictures of advertisements from the fabric that was made at Dan River Mills. Everything that they did had an eye towards the past, what used to be. And people could say, I heard somebody say earlier, why are you always looking backwards? But you're not looking backwards. You're appreciating the culture and finding ways to thread that through, because it's who you are. Figure out who you are. We do need to think big, but you need to figure out, as a community, just like I look at a community like a person, who am I now? Who have I been? Who am I now? And who do I want to be? And that's where you think big, but it's the same thread that goes all the way through. You don't lose your past in building your future. You continue it and make it even bigger and brighter. I don't know if I said how we did it.
Yeah, no.
But you be very intentional.
It's being very intentional about being authentic and finding ways about being authentically you and using that for your future, right? Paying homage to it in a way that's new. But is authentic.
That's exactly right.
To the point that, Dave, you were making earlier, that matters to this generation, right? This generation of people. Authenticity matters. You talk to me about how you did your development around the concept of authenticity. You can't be Disneyland. You got to be you.
No, I think that's a great point. So as part of the River District process and the Aquatic Center process, we went to probably 10 different Aquatic Center locations and maybe 10 different peer cities, Durham being one. And what's interesting about all of them, Old Vegas, Durham, Greenville, Chattanooga, you can keep rattling off, these case studies of very successful redevelopments, as everybody has a story. I would say, actually, I watched the documentary Because No One Else Would, which I believe is about your family and the decision. And I think that's an important point, is that a lot of these redevelopments, somebody made a decision. Someone made a decision that enough is enough, and it's time for our community to look at ourselves differently. The other thing is, all of these communities have something unique about them. So for instance, we talked about Durham and the relationship with Duke. 10 or 15 years ago, Durham didn't feel like it had a relationship with Duke. And so it's easy for us to go into that community and say, well, of course they were successful. They have Duke, or Greenville has Clemson, or South Bend has Notre Dame. I can tell you that South Bend does not feel like it has Notre Dame. And so finding out what is unique about your community and what you can leverage is vastly important to the success and authenticity.
Julie.
Yeah, I would, preaching to the choir here, but yeah, and for us, we don't have a river, we didn't have a Duke, we didn't really have any natural assets to distinguish Goldsboro from any other town. And that's really what it's all about, right? Figuring out your own assets to be able to be distinguishable so people can know where they are. Because if you plopped me down on Berkeley Boulevard or Greenville Boulevard, you wouldn't know the difference of where you were. But so understanding what those unique assets are to you, for us, it was our historic built stock, that we were lucky enough that most of them were still intact. They might have looked deplorable and they weren't being used, but they were an asset and an opportunity for us that we cultivated, and the Streetscape project helped enhance those opportunities. And then what we did is we stopped, again, trying to have so much control over what happened next. At one time, when I first started, we had a board of mostly older white men who wanted to be the next Williamsburg, which didn't provide a lot of an excitement and enthusiasm for younger folks. And so loosening up those controls over the years enabled more people to feel involved, and it became their downtown. And so that meant public art. A lot of times modern art was infused into our downtown in non-permanent ways, but to complement the historic built stock, which was an interesting concept for Goldsboro to embrace, but they certainly gotten there. And so while our streetscape project is one of the more celebrated projects of about $15 million investment, nationally, some of our more celebrated projects locally are a $500 mural that celebrates one of our assets, which is Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. And it's just a simple dandelion in black and white, and it's the flower that honors Seymour or military children because of how the dandelion flies and they take up root in other places. And so it's the most selfied social media picture that helps promote Goldsboro. So it's those kind of things, understanding your unique assets and then just enhancing them and celebrating them.
So I'm sure the crowd wants us to be a little more practical. So let's get into a practical question. I need each of you to just spend a minute kind of talking about, well, specifically talking about how you finance this. What does your money come from to help make these projects work? Julie, I'm going to start with you and work our way down.
Okay, well, since 2013, we've had about $44 million worth of investment projects happen in downtown. 9 of that has come from city general funds. We've leveraged that $9 million. We've received a little over $15 million in grants, and then the rest was private sector investment. So it was really about being strategic in the public investment and doing it in such a way that was intentional to spur private investment. And then the process of creating the story and being able to advocate for the impacts that would have to be able to leverage partners that provided the grants and opportunities for us to move the project forward.
Partnerships, partnerships, partnerships. Federal, state, local, take advantage of absolutely every you can, leverage whatever you can, have great partnerships with your local foundations, and make sure that you're working with all the different people in the community because they all have different sources of partnerships that they can also leverage. More specifically, just for one building example and that we're working on right now, we're very fortunate in Virginia to have enterprise zone. So we found part of our downtown is in an enterprise zone, so we're able to utilize that along with federal and state historic tax credits. We also won grant funding through a National Trust for $150,000, and you begin layering all of this together, and at the end of the day, you can do a $1.7 million project for about $494,000. And so at that point, you just make sure that your pro forma works out. So that may be too specific of an example, and for the developers in the room, that was very simplistic. But at the end of the day, it's really about taking whatever you have and making sure you turn it into 3 times that through whatever methodology you can find. And in every state and locale, it's going to be a little bit different. But have people that know that information and partner with them.
I think that's exactly right. What we've seen is leveraging partnerships on the public-private side are unbelievably productive. What's been interesting about our projects is they've been led, though, by the private side. But for the private side stepping up, the public funds wouldn't have been there. So for the River District specifically, the city committed $30 million of cash for public infrastructure spending, and our commitment was $300 million of private redevelopment. If we couldn't get the market to take over, developers to take over, we had a committed group of community leaders and philanthropists that were willing to step in and bridge the gap where the market wouldn't. On the Aquatic Center, the city was only in for $2 million out of $70 million. So again, led by the private sector, the school system, the local health system, but certainly led by the private side. I think public-private partnerships are the way of the future for leveraging these types of redevelopments.
Yeah, so we're private developers, so tax credits is the name of the game for us. In Durham, we used historic state and federal credits. Also, new markets. In fact, there was a time, and it might still be, where new markets had the most, or Durham had the most new markets per capita of anywhere in the country. It's back when you can make it rain, new markets with a good story. Here, it was also a public-private partnership in Durham. We had the city and the county each building parking decks. We had public-private partnerships with the building of the Durham Bulls ballpark, the theater. So there's been significant public investment into the Durham area. Here in Rocky Mount, we use the tax credits, of course, and while we don't have a monetary public-private partnership going on with the city, we do have a partnership in terms of their ability to help us through the process and get the things done that need to get done. There's some critical infrastructure work that needs to get done in and around the project. They've been very helpful with that. So it's certainly a partnership and certainly a collaboration from that standpoint, not from as much of a financial standpoint.
How about here? Rocky Mount.
That's what I said.
Oh, Rocky Mount.
That was Rocky Mount. The end.
Okay, making sure. So I'm going to ask one last question and leave us some time for the audience to ask questions, because I think they'll be really interested in specific areas of what we talked about. And that is, the always last question. In hindsight, okay, what do you wish you knew then that you know now? And Michael, don't say I wouldn't have done it. Okay. I'm kidding. What do you wish you knew then that you know now that would have and somehow helped or impacted either the timing or the project itself? Dave, let's start with you.
Well, let me think about that. I think that one thing is this stuff takes a lot of time. And if there is a way to expedite, don't take for granted the amount of time, energy, and effort this is going to take. And so making sure that you have the right people at the table, make sure that you're taking advantage of executing and err on the side of execution. You're not going to get it 100% right 100% of the time, and that's okay. In economic development, we can, as long as they're not big buildings like this, we can shift, we can adjust, we can change. And so I would just say err on the side of execution versus getting it 100% right.
Julie.
Flip side, I've been asked that a lot for Goldsboro, and I would tell you be patient with the time it takes, because if I had had the $20 million that I needed back in 2006 to implement the streetscape project, it wouldn't be what it is today. And that, I don't think it would have been as celebrated by the community. And we made compromises along the way. We learned from lessons because we did it in phases. So I think appreciating that, the process, being patient with it, is a valuable insight that I think I would have told my younger self, to be more patient, don't lose as much sleep as I did, and all those things, And I will also tell you that I think leadership is important. Having the right people at the table at the right time is really, really important. And I don't think that can be minimized at all.
Diana.
Well, it's a little bit harder for me because I've only been into it 3 years, and this development has been going on quite a long time. But when I talk with leaders in the community, even though we had a master plan and we followed the master plan, it didn't sit on the shelf at this time. I wish maybe if we could go backwards, we would have been slightly more strategic about different areas in our downtown, an arts area, entertainment area, residential area. Because as you grow, what you start to see is mixed development. We love mixed-use development. But you don't want somewhere that stays open until 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and a whole bunch of them necessarily mixed in with your residential without really thinking about it ahead of time, because you're going to have garbage has got to be, refuse has got to be picked up, noise is a consideration, parking, make sure you're balancing, if you don't have a lot of parking in your downtown, the use of those areas, different areas of the community. It's not been a detriment to our success. However, you're always looking for ways to improve, which is the question. And the other thing is you have to be willing to take risk. I don't think anybody that develops property here is not aware of that, but there's a difference between risk and recklessness. You never want to be reckless, but if you're not willing to take risks, both as a community, as a developer, as everybody involved in this process, and as a municipality, it's going to be much harder for you to find the success that you need. You can't always stay in the safe spaces. Again, don't be reckless, make educated risk, but you still have to take the risk.
I mean, nothing, everything, I don't know. I mean, here's what you gotta understand. No decision is ever final to me. Nothing we've done here is final. This is a moving target. We will master plan this thing 100 times. Because at the end of the day, I don't know what the driver's gonna be 12 months from now or 24 or 36 months from now. What we are, though, is we're agile and we're creative and we're ready to work on new things. So, you could say timing, you could say all that. At the end of the day, just let it rip. Just let it rip. Because you can talk about it and plan it and socialize it all you want, but if you don't let it rip, it ain't going to happen. Because the fact of the matter is any of our communities doing development in it, it's risky. I'm sorry, it's risky. It's not, an urban core or tertiary market that institutional investors are trying to chase. These are risky developments. And if you don't have the guts for it, don't do it. But if you do, let it rip.
I think it's something we've all learned playing in this business is that you're never done, right? This is the point you're making. You're never done. If you are, the economy's going to come around and surprise you anyway, right? So with that, guys, I'm sure you have questions. I have lots more, but I'm going to stop right now and allow you to ask specific questions that you have some great expertise up here. So ask them issues or concerns you have about doing this in your own community, okay? Questions? Can I get some help using this mic? Thank you. Way in the back. Raise your hands.
I had 2 cookies, so I need to work those off. So if the next one could be up front, that would be great.
They are good.
Thank you. I'll start from the practical side. I noticed both in Rocky Mount and from what you're saying that some of you have used fairly sophisticated mechanisms used in federal dollars like New Markets and Tiger, which are pretty complex and really, I think, demand that you have some expertise to put together. My question is sort of where and how did you find the expertise in these small communities to do that? And secondly, how did you evaluate whether, in fact, it really was the right thing in the right place to spend your time for something that took a whole lot of time to put together with, increasingly less chance that it will be successful because this money is sort of scarcer than hen's teeth right now?
Well, Tiger Grant, it's just a grant application. I mean, it's a comprehensive one that, grant writing, there is really no science to it. You just don't need to be trying to put a square peg in a round hole. You need to understand your funding source, what it is their goals are to be investors in your communities and be able to identify projects that meet those goals. And then you need to be able to communicate that. And so I was the grant writer. The Tiger Grant is just a federal funded grant. I've had more reporting for a $200,000 state grant that I've had to do. So I think just overcoming the fear that it's this bigger, mightier thing, right? And then being able to figure it out along the way. I mean, we were a staff of 3. We had to fight for our grant. Once they tell you that it's awarded, it's really not. You had to go through about a year's worth of being ready to prepare all kinds of plans and agreements and whatnot. And I remember the folks in Atlanta looking at us thinking we were nuts because not only did we have to go through that process, but we had to go through being an FT grantee. And this is more in the weeds than you need to know. But the moral of the story is, the bigger guys are no better than you. I mean, it's just sheer determination and willingness to do the work is all that's really needed.
Yeah, from the tax credits finance side of things, it's an acquired skill. Well, luckily, we were on the front edge of New Market tax credits. American Tobacco was the first project in the entire country to use New Markets on both the debt and the equity side. So it's not the first rodeo from that perspective. But at the same time, there are a plethora of people that you can pay for expertise. This will not be the holdup. It's figuring out how to structure tax credits and the like. That will not be the holdup.
I think it's know what you don't know. Nobody knows everything. I'm a jack of all trades, but I'm only a master of some. It's okay not to know everything. There's other people out there that are subject matter experts. So it's okay. Just know what you don't know and then go find the people that can help fill in the gaps.
The only thing I would add is opportunity zones are self-election, so it's super easy. And what we've found in Elkhart, Indiana is that we get developers that are local, that aren't the big institutional developers. In order to take a lower return, we'll stack that on an OZ fund, and then they'll be willing to take a risk that they weren't willing to take locally. So that's been
you're
great.
seeing the benefits of OZ deals.
Yeah.
Other questions? Perfect.
You're up front. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, this is a question more for Mr. Weaver about the Indiana project, specifically building around sort of an auditorium complex. Can you talk a little bit more about how that came together? And that was clearly a driver, but you said I think $300 million of ultimate sort of downtown development was looking to come into your river district. Can you just talk a little bit more about how the other private development fit into that sort of entertainment, sort of cultural resource?
Yeah, we had so this is a near downtown neighborhood. It's literally Main Street in Jackson. Jackson's the river district, Main Street's downtown. And so it's right there. The Aquatic Center has become a huge economic engine for Elkhart. So it's only 3 months old. We have 3,000 members. And like I said, we're actually holding the Illinois State Championship for high school swimmers in Indiana, in Elkhart, Indiana, next March. So that collaboration between, it's operated by the hospital, owned by the community foundation. The school is a capital contributor. And then the city provided the infrastructure around it. It has a separate board. If the hospital ever is bought out or decides they no longer want to operate the facility, they have to leave their keys on the table along with their $17 million investment. There's a 40-year lease with the school. Before we sell one membership, 40% of the operating costs for that facility are covered either through endowment, there's a $10 million endowment, or the lease. The economic driver is we can support 900 swimmers and 1,250 people along with the members, and a full third of the facility is a community center. So anyone in the community can come pick up a game of basketball or enjoy open swim hours. This created an influx of people downtown. So I was just down there 2 weeks ago. We had a meet, and there were 700 cars that otherwise would not have been downtown Elkhart in our small community. That created, because of the scale of that, it was clear that we needed to put a plan around it. We kind of had one shot to get that right. And that conversation was a community conversation. We have a community foundation that's also unique in Elkhart, Indiana, $300 million, with more than 50% of that being unrestricted. And so they are a huge player in economic development. They won't tell you that, but we're a huge player in economic development for our community.
I just let out a huge sigh before the microphone arrived at our table, in part because I'm not quite sure how to phrase this question diplomatically. But one of the things I am sometimes concerned about with revitalization efforts is the potential outcome of gentrification or the disenfranchisement of very vulnerable populations. So can you talk a little bit about what the demographics of the communities you targeted were before you got started and what they are now, if you know those outcomes, and then added to that, any lessons that you have learned to help us as we think about revitalizing communities where oftentimes poor people of color live who might not be welcomed back to that community for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I'll start on that one. I'm happy to. It's a big topic in Durham. And, the problem Durham has is the horse is out of the barn at some level. Basis at some level, real estate basis is kind of the root of all evil when it comes to this. And you got to get on it early, and you can't get it on early enough. Here in Rocky Mountain, we've already partnered with some organizations. We're doing a significant amount of land banking in the neighborhoods between us and downtown. Goal being that we really want to be able to control that outcome long term. But you got to get on it early, and you got to get on it hard. At the end of the day, this is a chicken and the egg issue that's very complicated. And it really is, I think, the most important topic in our country right now is how do we do things equitably? How do we do things in a way that we truly are trying to float all boats? And the answer is somewhere in the middle, and I think we're all trying to figure it out still. But I'll tell you, in Durham, for instance, and you made the comment about the Williamsburg and the old white men comment, which made me think about the fact that, the true measure of all of us as communities moving forward is going to be our ability to harness and foster diversity. That's a big deal. And if we can't do that, and if you can't do that as a community, you're going to fail as a community. I'm sorry, that's just where we're headed. In Durham, diversity is our greatest strength. It really is. And I don't say that because it sounds good from a PR or marketing standpoint. I say that because it's factual. I say that because if you look at the Fortune 500 companies, and those companies with the most diverse C-suites have the best revenue growth, because different backgrounds and different experiences create different solutions that are better than just one perspective. So I kind of urge everybody here, because we think about it in Durham, we think about it a lot here in Rocky Mount, but how do we foster diversity? How do we foster inclusion? How do we make something for everyone? And it's really, really hard in urban centers. I think it's even harder in a more rural economy. It's just a very difficult thing, and I think that's a really good question. My best advice, though, is you got to get out in front of it as early as you can when the basis is as low as possible to have the most impact. Because once the economic rejuvenation starts happening, it's going to get to the point where it's just simply too expensive to do it at scale.
I just want to add really, really one important point to that. I'm going to tie it to the conversation a minute ago. The reason we got so far behind it in Durham is because of exactly what you heard here earlier. No one in Durham believed we would be this successful. Therefore, why do we have to worry about gentrification? Why do we have to worry about equity? Why do we have to worry about, because no one thought it would happen. Every community that you're talking about here had that same issue, right? No one's going to believe. You have to build it. You would not only have to believe, as Michael just said, you got to build it in as part of the original plan. Anybody else want to talk?
Sure. I think whenever you've got people who come together for planning, make sure that your committees, your boards, your planning commissions reflect your community. It's very, very important that you don't, just like you were referencing earlier, that in our case in Danville, I believe we're 55% African American, 40%, I don't math, white, and then 5% other. So it's, in our case in downtown Danville, we didn't have a situation where people were being dislocated for the most part, because most of those buildings were empty. Now, that doesn't mean we don't need to be thoughtful, and actually this is something that I referenced earlier, is making sure that everyone feels like, as we move forward, the River District is a place for everyone, that it's not just a place for wealthy people to shop, or it's not just a place for a certain age group. We have to make sure that when we talk about diversity, we're also talking about people who may have accessibility issues. We're talking about ages. We're talking about all kinds of things, and most certainly, color is included in that, but culture is included in that, religion's included in that. So diversity, it's a very large perspective that you need to look through, and so you've got to bring people in at the very beginning to be able to give that perspective, and it does make for a richer, more vibrant place for sure.
And one thing I'd add to that is, this is not going to happen by accident. It's not. That's just not how we're structured. I mean, I think that diversity and inclusion is not just at the poorest levels. It's the wealthiest. It's at every level. This is in the American Underground, which is our startup ecosystem that we created and fostered. We now have about 300 teams, and we have purposely worked on this, and now can report that we have 48% of our teams are female or minority led. Right? No one touches that. And that's important because these are the people making the hiring decisions, right? These are the people deciding who they want to staff their offices with and their shops with. And so I think, it's initiatives like that at that level. There's initiatives at all different levels that are important here, but you got to be intentional, and you got to wake up and decide that's what we're going to do, because it's, again, not something that's just, you're going to say, oops, we're equitable, right?
So we've seen a 10 to 12 year period of economic growth. Sometime fairly soon, and if I could predict this, I wouldn't be sitting here today. The economy's going to turn south again. How do you prepare your initiatives for the almost mandatory pause that's going to happen when we hit the next recession?
So we obviously have this conversation a lot in Elkhart, Indiana. Like I said, we are the litmus test for the economy. Obviously, 80% of RVs made in Elkhart. This is super luxury, right? And so going from 4% to 20%, we know what has happened in the past. We know that we have a decreasing population. We know that RV production has gone from 500,000 to 450,000. The indicators are there, but we know what happens if we don't invest. And so it becomes more of an investment conversation to say, hey, we already know this is risky. We already know this is a big bet. But we know that if we don't do anything, all the indicators are heading in the wrong direction. So how do we change the tide? How do we have an economic diversification conversation in Elkhart, Indiana, when we're running 2.5% unemployment and McDonald's can't keep the dining room open because they can't get workers at $15 an hour? That's the wrong time to have a diversification conversation. We have to invest in ourselves. Again, I see it as the ante into being relevant and the ante into having the conversation about diversification.
I just, if your time horizon is 50 years, it doesn't matter. Right. In all reality, I mean, and you know, the way we look at Durham or here is we're not going anywhere. So when we're investing for the very long future, and investment that I don't want to do because I'm worried about upcoming economic shift one or the other is not what I want to do here.
And I'm sorry. I would just say being prepared and being able to articulate a vision and a strategy that will provide people some level of comfort is very helpful. And just being able to, you know, engage like we do as a Main Street community. We do a lot of events, strategic events in downtown to bring people to downtown that will hopefully, you know, patron the merchants. And so a lot of that strategic energy is something we'll continue to focus on, and just being connected with the business community in our downtown as well as we are, we'll be able to help them go through that time.
Also, that's why these entrepreneurship initiatives are so very important. Sometimes as a downtown organization, some do it and some don't, but I think we all need to think about it. It comes back to diversification. And when the economy does eventually take that downturn, if you're self-employed, you know, that's a little bit different than if you're working for a large factory or a large company. I'm not saying you still won't feel the effects, but that's why it is so important to diversify the economy. And it's okay if entrepreneurs don't create 10 jobs or 20 jobs. If they create a job, then you're still diversifying your economy. The other part is it's just in concurrence. It's like playing the stock market or your retirement fund. It's the long game. You know, you're investing for the long term. You can't give that up. You can't throw it in and cash your chips in because you had a bad 5 years. And I know that's very simplistic, and I'm not an economist. However, it's the long game that you're looking at, and that's why you want to make sure your investors understand it's a long game too.
We have time for one more question.
All right, we will end minutes early. For the next 15 minutes, we're going to take a cookie break for those, if there's any left, right?
Let's have one or two.
Okay. Help yourself. We'll reconvene again at 3 o'clock, 2:45 to 3 o'clock, 15 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. How about a round of applause for our panelists?